Hi there, welcome to this video. This video accompanies our latest blog post here. We're talking about Spin application structure today. We'll be using Spin to build our applications in this article. So if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and install Spin. Now, the best way to install Spin is to follow along with the official documentation at developer.fermyon.com. I'll be sure to leave a link to the Fermyon developer home in the description below. We'll essentially be using Rust-specific examples in this blog and video combo, but obviously the same principles apply to other languages from a structural point of view. So we encourage you to follow along in the language of your choice. And if you have any issues, please reach out via Discord or via our GitHub. Okay, so I'll leave some links to Discord and Spin's GitHub repo in the description as well. All right, so getting started, the first thing we're going to talk about is using the HTTP empty template. Now, this creates a HTTP application with no components. And you may ask, why would we want to do that? Well, it's a good question. So it's more about thinking long-term for an application that's going to grow. And if you've already used Spin templates using Spin new and the Spin add commands to create applications in the past, you will have noticed that they just work and can build and run instantly. When we use the HTTP empty, we actually just create the shell, like the structure of an application. So let's compare and contrast those two. To kick things off, let's create an application without using HTTP empty, and let's see where we end up there. All right, so here we create our new application with a single component, and we are able to see the directory structure here, and that looks fine for now. And if we have a look at the manifest, we see that all of the configuration has been scaffolded for us, and essentially this application is ready to build and run. Now, if we continue to scaffold an additional component using Spin add into the existing application, then we'll start to notice some asymmetry. So let's do that. We create an additional component here by using the Spin add command. We've got the name, description, and HTTP path. If we continue to scaffold additional components using Spin add into this existing application, we can now see this asymmetry appearing. So essentially what's happening here is the new HTTP component called additional HTTP Rust is a subsidiary of the original component, and essentially the additional is tucked away inside the originals directory, which creates like a hierarchy. But if we look at the manifest, we see that these two components are just side by side and there's no hierarchy. So the file system really isn't aligned with the manifest. The lesson here is that when starting to build a multi-component application without using the HTTP empty template at the start will result in this sort of asymmetric application structure. So what do you do if you've already got an existing application with this structure? Well, let's show you how to change that. Here's a few tips and tricks to modify your existing structure. So what we can do here is make an original HTTP Rust application directory, and then we can move the content from the original application, the one that we created with the Spin new command, and we're actually going to just move that contents into this new directory. Now, straight away, we can see here from a like a folder layout point of view that the structure is more balanced. We have two components side by side, and we have the manifest at the top level. Speaking of which, the manifest will now need to be updated so that it reflects the structural changes that we've just made. So we need to update the paths in here from old paths. We're just essentially adding the new directory to the front of the path. So the other thing that we need to do is create a workdir. Now, a workdir is essentially associating the directory with the cargo.toml file for all the dependencies on a per component basis. and it also has your source directory. In our case with Rust, it's the lib.rs file, is all encapsulated into that workdir. We'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. So essentially the workdir is only created when using spin add. So because we did a spin new, we have to create a workdir in our config here. Okay, so just another point, note that the watch paths, so the spin watch feature, they don't need to be updated because they're actually relative to the workdir. Okay, so we have a new structure and our supporting config, and we can go ahead and build and run this application. Before we do that, let's update the Rust source code for each component so it makes sense, and we'll call each one separately. So we're changing this source code here on the first component, and the source code on the additional component can also be updated. And once we've updated those, so we essentially have two components running in the same application, we can do a spin build minus up. So in one command, we can build and run. And once this is built, we can see the two endpoints for which requests can be made. And we're testing this out. So we have the original and the additional both working. And so this exercise is just really an example of how to restructure an existing application. Now from here, if we were to add additional components, the spin add command would create a new directory alongside these ones, and those would be our workdir. And also the spin add command would create the workdir line in the config file. So essentially, now that we've made this small adjustment, this structure is now scalable from a balance like symmetry point of view. So let's try the other path. Now let's do it the other way, where we use the HTTP empty to start with. Okay, so what we do is we start with a blank canvas and we use the HTTP empty template. And we'll get an application structure that looks like this. Now, as we add new components to this empty structure, we'll see that this application is always balanced from a folder structure perspective. So here we add the first of many. And then we add the second of many. We can see this all looks good. And moving into the manifest, we can see this also looks good, and that all the work that is done for us by spin means that there's no config required. So we have our workdirs both created for us. We've also got everything configured to work. We just need to build and run this. So the folder layout and all the config is taken care of. Now the file server component that we add here will create a slightly different structure. It's not actually a workdir. It's not actually a component that has a working directory. It actually just has a directory to store assets, so static assets in it. So what we do is we put a bunch of files in there that we want to serve to incoming requests. And then we see when we start the application that the requests coming in will be served the static content from our local directory. Okay, so we can see the file server config from the manifest reflects this. For example, there's no working directory, just an assets directory. We add some static content in here, so an image, and also we'll add some text files to serve. So we've got an old text file, and what we're going to do is also add a new text file, which brings us to our next component. We're going to create a redirect component. And what this does is redirects from one static asset to another for this example. Okay, so we're redirecting from the old text to the new text as part of that standard operation of that redirect component. Now we can build the application, and then we can test out all the endpoints by making requests to our app. So let's go and see our first component here. And then we see our second component. Now, if we create a request to the old text file that we've deliberately made redundant with our redirect component, we'll see that the component will make sure that we see the new content. So we're seeing the new text file in place of the old text file, even though the request is inbound for the old content. Okay, so if we make an additional request to the static my static image path, we'll get the content from our assets directory. So just a closing note here. When we are creating components using templates, we just have to remember that an application can only have one trigger type. So we have the Redis triggers, and we also have HTTP triggers. So if we templates list, we can see that there's a bunch of HTTP templates that we can use, and the redirect and the file server are both HTTP compliant. The other one, the Redis templates, they actually operate on a different trigger. So you can see in the configuration file that they actually use a Redis trigger and a Redis URL and listen on a channel, things like that. So just a note when you're creating your application that you can only use one trigger type. So it's either a HTTP trigger-based application, or it's a Redis trigger application. Okay, so that's about all for today. Thanks for watching, and please go ahead and visit the developer documentation for anything you need. You can go ahead and join us over on Discord, ask some questions, follow us on social media, and keep up where we're appearing next. So there's a few events in the very near future. So please, if you go to any of these events, pop along and come and visit us, have a chat, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching.